Hello, Year 9. Welcome to another religious studies video lesson. I'm in school today, so cannot be here to do a live lesson. So this is like the next best thing. And hopefully you'll find it interesting. We're learning about pacifism today and whether conflict is always bad or is it sometimes useful. And yeah, that's it. Hopefully you'll find it interesting. The first thing you've got to do is watch this video, watch this interesting video clip. So it's an interesting clip and wondered what you made of it, really, what you thought this person was doing and who they were and stuff like that. So I'm just going to share my screen with you and talk you through a few things about this lesson. So firstly, you've just watched a clip. Interesting. This person nobody knows who it is, but sometimes he's referred to as Tank Man or Unknown Rebel. And it's someone who stood in front of a column of tanks. And this was the day after a major protest and the military had used force on a load of people protesting in Tiananmen Square. So it's in the late 80s. Quite a lot of people had been killed. And yeah, it was a pretty grim time the previous day. And this person stood in front of these tanks, and it's kind of a mystery, really, because nobody really knows who this person is. I don't think. Somebody might know, but it's quite an iconic vision of how somebody who had no real power is standing against a load of tanks, and if they wanted to, they could have just run him over, but he kind of used what we might call a moral force against those people. And he was prepared to risk his life to stand there and almost put his life in the hands of his oppressors or the aggressors in the situation, the people driving the tanks and the military. And one of the first things really is the amount of bravery that must have taken, but also the fact that he wasn't being violent as well. So it shows a lot of people, when we discuss pacifism, they assume that pacifism is kind of like the weak response, or like, you know, a coward's way of dealing with a problem. But often pacifism isn't like that at all. People like Gandhi, for example, knew they were going to, and his followers knew they were going to take a beating, and they knew that they were going to be met with physical resistance and force, and they carried on regardless. So it's pretty courageous. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. So this lesson, we're going to learn about what pacifism is, firstly, then analyze whether we think people should be pacifists. Is it the best way forward in situations of conflict? And then you can create a letter from a pacifist point of view. And it was going to be anti-war, but I kind of changed it to a more relevant thing for this kind of time, about nuclear warfare. So yeah, and those are just the main objectives. There's loads more things that we're going to learn about in this lesson. I think there's about 5 videos to watch as well and discuss, so should be pretty interesting. So by the way, just to say, you don't really need any worksheets or anything like that. It might be helpful to print off the quote one if you have got a printer, but don't feel like you need to. You can just engage with the lesson without doing that, so don't worry too much. So firstly, we're just going to go over some key terms. We've talked about some of these words anyway in previous lessons, and you've probably done them in the key terms test too. So just to recap, really, a pacifist is someone who refuses violence in all cases. They will try to avoid conflict. And as we learned last lesson, when we looked at religious attitudes to war, many Christians are pacifists. Conscientious objectors are slightly different. They're people that might not always be pacifists, but they might object to a certain war or conflict or situation. They might object to using violence then because of their conscience. So they might feel that it's not right to fight in a certain war. So for example, in World War I, lots of conscientious objectors were called cowards. And it's that thing again, calling peaceful sort of people, like thinking that they're somehow not courageous, but these people were shot and they knew that they would be as well. So they just still stuck by that. So in World War I, yeah, lots of conscientious objectors were shot. And I think it was only recently that the government formally apologized to the families of those people who were killed in that way. But even in the modern day, you get conscientious objectors. So they might sign up to the army, for example, and then be deployed in a certain place, but they end up maybe coming to an understanding that they don't agree with that conflict. So in the Iraq war, some conscientious objectors went to prison or were court-martialed from the forces because they refused to fight. And again, it's a tricky situation because in a military environment, you need people to follow orders, I guess. But from a moral perspective, what if you do disagree with certain orders to I don't know, fire a missile at a certain place? So the image for this is a t-shirt worn in support of a conscientious objector who is in prison, and he said, "I'd rather go to prison for desertion than kill a child by mistake, because prison ends, but you never get over killing a kid." So it shows the turmoil that person was going through. Really, nobody wants to break the law and go to prison, but he believed that doing something like that was even worse. So yeah, very interesting and complicated, like all moral issues, which is why I like talking about them. It's really good. Whoops, gone too far. All right, so yeah, this is the first activity. If you've printed off the worksheet, there it is. It's the one that looks like that. And you just have to simply read the quotes and decide whether they're in favor of pacifism or not pacifism. So you can just put a P or an N next to each one of those. If you haven't got a printer like me, I don't want it taking up all the space and messing about with all the ink that it requires, so I wouldn't bother. But if you haven't, look, I'll just move my little face out of the way of this. There you go. And then you could just maybe jot down the quotes or just summarize them and just decide which ones are pacifist and non-pacifist. Okay. I won't hang around waiting for you to do that. You can just pause it now and then look at those ones and then unpause it when you're done. Welcome back. I'm going to just show you that there's some on the back of the sheet as well. These are the next ones. I'm in the way again. Come down here. And that top bit, for me, on my screen, the zoom bit gets in the way of that. But the quote from Gandhi says that, actually, wait a minute. Instead of messing about like that, I'll just move it down a bit. Got the room. There. So pause it again, do those ones, and then unpause. So now it's time to go through the answers. Let's discuss these. This one about, we have enough evidence from history to show the overthrow of violence by violence produces more violence. I've made that one too easy because I labeled it by saying that this person was a pacifist. So obviously that one's a pacifist quote. A nice easy one to start you off. The next one, though, is saying that it's not pacifist. Sometimes you need to take up the gun to get rid of the gun. You need to meet violence with violence, according to that person, who I don't know who it is, but it's an interesting quote. And this one is a pacifist quote. Evil can only be overcome by good. And this one is not pacifist. It says, watch out. These are old-fashioned words like lest, but it sort of just means watch out because in your anxiety, by worrying about avoiding a war, you obtain a master. So if you keep appeasing your aggressor, you might get taken over by them, I suppose. It's a warning against not standing up for your position, I suppose. And John Stuart Mill, this one is not pacifist. John Stuart Mill here is saying that some things are worth fighting for, and you have to be prepared to suffer and endure conflict for things. This quote here, I'm in the way again. This quote here is a not pacifist one again. It's saying that if you're a pacifist, you might end up deserting people who need your help the most. So saying that you need to be prepared to fight for things in the world. And then this one is a pacifist quote from George Fox, saying that we don't like any fighting or weapons. I think George Fox was quite a famous Quaker, and I think that they're one of the denominations of Christianity that are most associated with pacifism. And then the Gandhi quote, obviously it's Gandhi, so it's probably a pacifist. This one as well is saying that you need to find new ways, basically, instead of violence. And the last one is not pacifist. It's saying that if you keep blunting your swords in the name of humanity, sooner or later someone will come along with a sharp sword and hack off our arms. So it's saying that watch out, because if you're not prepared to stand up for yourself in situations and fight for what is good in the world, then you will basically lose. And again, that you got lots of points here on both sides of a certain moral position. So again, you're probably going to be all different, and that's a good thing. That's why I like moral issues so much, discussing them, because on the other end of this video, you've got you folk all sitting here. Some of you are probably thinking, yeah, I'm well into fighting for what is right. I'd go to war to defend this or fight for that. And some of you are probably thinking, no, there's nothing I would kill for, and everyone in between, you know. So that's really good. Just be thinking about where you are on the sort of scale of things, and speak to the people that you live with and talk to on a regular basis about it too. just a quick recap from a previous lesson. We've got some quotes here just to remind us that lots of people think Jesus represented pacifism. So that's why they say Christianity should be always a peaceful religion. Blessed are the peacemakers. This idea that you should love your enemies. And that quote, all who take up the sword die by the sword, it's quite interesting because sort of it's kind of saying that if you're a person who is minded to turn to violent solutions, then you're probably more likely to then be involved in conflict, and then that will could be the undoing of you, I suppose. And then it says, leave judgment to God, don't judge people. So Christianity sort of is against judgment and human beings judging situations. So yeah. However, on the flip side of that, again, we've got that issue of when Jesus chucked out the moneylenders out of the temple. He started kicking off, turned over the tables, got pretty in the face of the people who were doing that. So some people say Jesus wasn't this meek sort of pacifist person. He was just saying some good points about it, but then on some occasions was willing to fight for things as well, or at least be a bit forceful about something. And the Roman Empire adopted Christianity as their religion and converted a lot of people to Christianity as well. And they marched under a banner of the cross and Christian sort of ideas. And world leaders since then as well have used Christian language to talk about war and the fact that you need to fight and oppose evil and things like that. So it's interesting. And on that note, I'm going to show you a second video now. Just want you to watch this. I'm really sorry, this video is quite upsetting. I just watched it a minute ago to check and thought, oh, I think people are going to be upset by watching this, and it is quite emotional, really. So but if you don't feel like you have to watch it just because it's in a lesson, if you're upset, like I say, in lesson time, if you can just leave the room, but you don't even need to leave the room. Just flick it on a little bit until the video is ended. But it's about a thing that happened, I think, way before a few years before you were born, but I definitely remember it. And you must have heard of it, I guess. But it's about the attacks on the World Trade Center. So watch this video and let me know, discuss afterwards what you sort of think about it, and think about how you'd feel if this was an attack on your nation. Because obviously we don't, I don't live in America. Some of you may have lived in America, but it's difficult enough watching something like this happen when it's not your sort of society that it's happened to. But think about how you would want your government to react. Would you be angry? Would you be wanting a peaceful reaction, or would you be chomping at the bit for a full-on invasion or war? It's quite difficult because they didn't know who to fight against, but they managed to select some countries to invade as a result of this, I suppose. Anyway, enough of my rambling. Watch the video and see what you think.
American 11, are you trying to call?
The cockpit is not answering their phone. Our number 1 has been staffed and our 5 has been staffed.
Hey, I'm going to call from Washington. I have a situation with American 11, a possible hijack.
What's going on, Betty? The aircraft is erratic again. Problem, very erratic. Betty, talk to me. Betty, are you there? Betty? Betty?
The plane just What? The 737?
It what?
The World Trade
Who are you
Center.
talking to?
Oh, God. Oh, my God.
United 175, New York. We have some problems over here right now. We might have a hijack over here, 2 of them.
Jules, this is Ryan. Listen, on an airplane that's been hijacked, if things don't go well, and it's not looking good, I just want you to know I absolutely love you. I want you to do good. Go have a good time. Same to my parents and everybody. And I just totally love you, and I will see you in Chester. Bye, babe.
What are those people gonna do? All the elevators are blocked out.
Oh my God! So both towers are now.
Okay, I got an aircraft 6 miles east of the White House.
Crystal City, just north of Crystal City.
Just to the north of your town.
Yeah, stop all departures.
Pentagon just got hit. Don't say that. God damn, I can't even protect my NCA.
United 93, that traffic for you is 1 o'clock, 12 miles eastbound 370.
Negative contact, we're looking, United 93.
United 93, Cleveland, if you hear the center ident.
Сега се да, и при мен седи, я да бъда
Tuesday, 9:47 a.m.
Hi, baby. Baby, you have to listen to me carefully. I'm on a plane that's been hijacked. I'm on the plane. I'm calling from the plane. I want to tell you I love you. Please tell my children that I love them very much. And I'm so sorry, babe. I hope to be able to see your face again, baby. I love you. Bye.
We're 56865. We have, I believe it is a Boeing 757. Can you see him up there, sir?
That's confirmed. It looks like he's rocking his wings.
Roger.
He's rocking back and forth.
We're 56865. I advise you stay away from that aircraft. Go north as fast as you can.
United 93, have you got information on that yet?
Yeah, he's down.
He's down?
Yes.
When did he land?
He did not land.
Oh, he's down?
Yes,
Down?
somewhere up northeast of Camp David.
Sean, it's me. I just want to let you know I love you, and I'm stuck in this building in New York. There's lots of smoke, and I just wanted you to know that I love you always.
At number 2 World Trade Center, right. Lady was shooting in the office. We're not ready to die, but it's getting bad.
I'm on the 83rd floor. I'm gonna die, aren't I? No. I'm gonna die.
Liv, say your prayers. We're gonna think positive because you gotta help each other get off the floor.
I'm
Now,
gonna die.
A new type of war. That's what it is.
Okay, so in the second part of this section of the lesson, I'm going to show you a video clip of the response that President Bush, who was the president of the USA at the time of this attack, he went and this is his speech from the National Archives that he gave after that attack. Again, we'll discuss it afterwards, but just listen to what he says and think, you know, do you agree with what he says? And is try and think what his stance is. Do you think he's arguing for a pacifist kind of response, or is he arguing for a war, just war sort of response, a military response? See what you think. We'll discuss it afterwards.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices. Secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks. The functions of our government continue without interruption. Federal agencies in Washington, which had to be evacuated today, are reopening for essential personnel tonight and will be open for business tomorrow. Our financial institutions remain strong, and the American economy will be open for business as well. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them. I appreciate so very much the members of Congress who have joined me in strongly condemning these attacks. And on behalf of the American people, I thank the many world leaders who have called to offer their condolences and assistance. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world, and we stand together to win the war against terrorism. Tonight, I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has been threatened. And I pray they will be comforted by a power greater than any of us, spoken through the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you. Good night, and God bless America.
Hello, welcome back from watching that video. So the president of the USA at the time, I asked you, did you agree with his response to the attacks? And yeah, how would you describe his stance on the conflict? Why do you think he was using religious language? Lots to think about there, really, because if you know that two wars that were probably the biggest wars that the UK was involved in recent, well, lots quite far back, were kind of based on this attack. And again, there's so many different opinions about it. Remember last time I was saying, last lesson on the just war lesson, about how much difference of opinion there was about the Iraq war in 2003. Well, again, it's similar in people's views about the wars that have been fought in recent years by the US and America. There's masses of different opinions. Lots of people are against those wars. Lots of people are thinking that that they reached good outcomes in some ways. So yeah, just wonder what you thought about that. So on to the next thing. We're going to be thinking about how pacifism can be applied to actual situations that have come up over the years. So in the normal lessons, we would get people to discuss these in pairs, and you had to sort of think, what would be the best position to take in each situation? Would it be a violent approach, just war, fight back, defend yourself using force, or pacifism? Would it be that the best way to deal with this thing is a peaceful solution where you refuse to fight and engage in war? And the situations aren't all to do with war and things like that. Some of them are kind of everyday conflicts that you might find yourself in as well. So it's just the purpose of this part of the lesson is just to really get your opinion and practice expressing what you think about these kinds of things. So the first one is World War II. Imagine that you're in the 40s, your country's under threat, you're able to fight in a war. I think everybody who was over the age of 18 was eligible to enlist. You hear that Nazis are torturing and killing lots of groups of people, and you don't want this to happen in your country. So how do you respond? What do you think would be the best way to approach that conflict? Hit the pause button and jot down a couple of sentences to express your ideas about that. It's always a tricky one with war, because lots of people, when have done this lesson in the past, say, yeah, I'll go and fight in a war. But I think people underestimate sometimes how really dreadful it would be to fight in a war. So I think you have to really believe in what you're fighting for. And I think in that case, almost everybody probably did believe it. But what about the war in Iraq? This was the war that we were talking about last lesson when we were thinking about the just war theory. Remember that this one was much more divisive in terms of the people's opinions about it. You might remember from last lesson that it started off that the weapons of mass destruction element of this was emphasized as to justify the war. But then as the war went on and the weapons weren't found, people, I think it's fair to say that the government switched their main motive for the war to be deposing this dictator who was in charge of the country. So again, think whether you see that as a valid reason to have a conflict. Pause it and jot down a couple of ideas. Again, there's no right or wrong answer to this. There's mainstream bodies of opinion on both sides. Next one, bullying. So this is one that I reckon almost everybody's been bullied at some stage. I know I definitely was. And what should you do? Again, there's different opinions on this one. So pause it and jot down what you think. Again, just like the war, just like the war ones, this one divides opinion massively as well. And I think, I don't know, from discussions had in lessons, I think people's attitudes to bullying are mainly influenced by parents, I guess. Some people say, oh, my mum says if someone bullies me or hits me, I'll just smack them right back. And yeah, so there's that kind of approach. And people get taught, you know, you've got to stand up for yourself. And if you don't, bullies will think that you're a victim and they can keep doing it. But at school, we sort of say if there's bullying, you've got to report it. You've got to, you know, tell your teacher and it'll be dealt with in a different way. But yeah, so that is a tricky one. That's probably more controversial than the Iraq war, I'd imagine. People have different opinions about this one. And the next one is final one, really. It's Saturday evening, you're walking home from a friend's house, it's dark, you take a shortcut to get down an alleyway. I just need to move myself out of the way again. Hang on, get out of the way. And someone comes towards you, pins you against the wall and says, I've got a knife. I want your phone and your money. What would you do then? It's, again, a tricky one. Jot down your actual opinion and say what you think you would do. And just like all the others, that one divides opinion as well. I remember a friend of mine, when I worked at Burger King, he was in London and he said that a gang just came up with, they were obviously armed, they had knives, they said, give me your wallet. And he said, yeah, all right. And he handed it over. And I think, judging by that situation, he probably made the right choice. But then I remember watching on TV, you probably don't know at your age who this person is, but this guy who was on telly ages ago called Chris Tarrant, he used to present a program called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And he read out the questions. I remember watching him on an interview on TV on a talk show or something. And he said that he was, someone attempted to mug him and he just lashed out. He just said, I just said no, and punched the person. And, you know, he was basically saying that what you should do is just attack people who try and mug you. But again, it's tricky because you could end up making the situation worse. I think the official advice from police and stuff is that if someone mugs you, you should throw your wallet far away and then move in the opposite direction. And then it confuses the mugger because they've got to decide, shall I get their wallet or shall I chase after the person? What shall I do? But again, there's probably no correct, definitive answer to that question. I guess you just have to do what you think's right in a situation, but which is why it's pretty good to think about it now. I guess it depends. So yeah, overall, weigh up your ideas. Thinking about those situations, weigh up your ideas. Is pacifism and the best way to resolve potentially conflict situations? Yeah, sorry, there's no right or wrong. There's no going through the answers here. I can't tell you what to think or how to live your life. You've got to make your own decisions. And also, here's just a few opinions about whether pacifism or violence are the best ways to resolve other problems as well. Still haven't thought of an activity. We've had this slide for a while and still haven't thought of anything to really get you to do with it, but it's just to let you know that there's different ideas out there. Again, like a pause for thought. Okay, so the final part really then is to explore overall this issue of the causes of violence. What makes people violent? At this point, I'm sorry, but there's lots of like wind blowing in the background on the balcony, and it's making that whistling sound. So your house isn't haunted or there's nothing spooky going on. It's just really windy outside. That's what that noise is. But yeah, I don't know that there's a definitive answer to this. What makes people violent? I think it comes down to temperament. Definitely, that I guess a lot of that might be genetic, but I think culture, the culture that you're brought up in, definitely has a part to play as well. And it depends as well on your environment that you find yourself in too. Some places are so laid back, especially around here in Norfolk, or well, you guys probably live in Suffolk, but again, it's probably similar. You don't find much cause for conflict. And I live in the centre of Norwich, and it's just generally fine. So what makes people violent? Could come up with some ideas. If this was a live lesson, I'd say put your ideas in the chat bar, but just jot down some ideas. And finally, got some video clips again to show you. I'm going to edit these clips into this video back to back so that you can watch them straight one after another. But I thought I'd just introduce them to you first because, again, these clips will be controversial, that you'll think, what's this saying? What's the message here? And again, what I want you to think about really is, what are these clips saying about the causes of violence? What makes these kinds of conflict situations happen? And so there's two clips really, but they're both from the same movie, and it's a documentary film made in 2002, and it's called Bowling for Columbine. And sadly, it's about a shooting that happened in a school in America, and the movie was made after this to try and make sense of it all really, I suppose, and try and think about what makes a society violent. So it's focused on the USA, and but if any of you are from the USA, I hope you won't be offended by the videos, but it is just it is quite sort of, it's a good documentary, I think, but it's trying to get to the bottom of why in the USA in particular these kinds of incidents tend to happen, whereas they might not happen so much in other places. I know they still do happen elsewhere, but yeah, it's just trying to make sense of that really. So there's two clips. The first one is set to the soundtrack of Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong, and it's about the US foreign policy after World War II and how that has sort of influenced and changed the world and made yeah, I guess it's about, well, I won't tell you what it's about. You just watch that and think, see if you can think, what is the filmmaker trying to say about what causes some of these conflicts and these situations to come about. And then the second clip is all about trying to explain why these youngsters did this really violent action. And it's trying to get to the bottom of what makes the culture of a place a violent environment, I suppose. So it looks at cultural factors and looks at the history of America in particular. And there's a cartoon sort of basic run through of American history that's sort of meant to be a bit of a joke really, but it really oversimplifies it. But it's very interesting to watch and sort of try and again try and explain while you're watching these, what is the filmmaker saying about what makes societies become violent. And again, afterwards, there's some other questions to think about. What do you think are the causes of violence overall? And does religion cause or solve violence? Because on the face of it, religions say, be peaceful, turn the other cheek and that kind of thing. But some people say things like religion causes all wars, and I personally don't agree with that. When people say that in lessons, I go, do you think religion really causes all the war? Or is it about other stuff like resources and power and land and stuff like that? So loads to think about. Does fighting solve problems overall? And then finally, apply it to the UK. Is the UK a violent place in your view? So the videos will follow in a few seconds, and just feel free to just jot down any ideas that you have about this topic. Okay, good luck with that. Okay, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed watching those video clips and jotted down lots of notes about them. I've just jotted down a few things while I was watching those. I think that the first clip is talking about the US involvement in lots of different countries after World War II, and how that led to really complicated issues arising for them in terms of supporting different countries and then supporting other countries and then funding rebellions in other nations. And I don't know what was going through the minds of all the different policymakers at the times, but I guess the filmmaker there is probably suggesting that they've at least got into a muddle about who to support and at which times. And sometimes you might fund one rebellion in a country because you think these people need support against a different enemy, and then that might come back to bite. I think that they're suggesting that came back to bite the US there, in that they made enemies, I suppose. But again, I suppose it's suggesting that if you get involved in lots of conflicts, then conflict might find you back. I think that's what, having seen the rest of the film, I think that's what they're kind of suggesting there. I don't really know what I think about that, because I think sometimes it might be good for a country like the USA or the UK to get involved in world affairs when they think they can do something good. So yeah, I'm not sure about that one. I think generally war's probably bad. You know, most people would say that that's not a controversial thing to think, but it depends. Again, thinking back to the just war theory stuff from the previous lesson, it depends why you're getting involved in a war and what the aim is for you, and whether you can justify that to other people as well, I suppose. So yeah, it's tricky. I'll be interested to find out what all your opinions were about that clip. The second clip was really interesting as well, because I wrote down here that it's suggesting that that greater availability of weapons and guns and things in the US obviously leads to more deaths caused by those weapons. But then the sort of second part of the clip, where it's got the sort of cartoon, it's really brief history. I know it's a bit sort of jokey, made in a jokey way, but it's making some points about, I think the main argument of that cartoon really is that fear causes violence, and if you're scared of other people, then it makes you be more defensive, and it makes you then be more willing to be violent, not even to counterattack, but to kind of preempt violence that you might expect by other people. And that's what leads to people being more, but there being more violence in society, I suppose. They're saying that if you're worried that people are going to mug you in the street, then you're more likely, if you live in a country where you can buy guns like in the shops, you're probably more likely to then buy them. And there's there's probably a lot of truth to that. I mean, if I was worried about being mugged, or if someone mugged, we were talking about being mugged earlier or bullied and things, and if I thought that some people who were trying to mug me, had chased me home to my flat now, and they were banging on the door. I think part of me would wish that I did buy some sort of handgun with my Pringles earlier when I went to Tesco's, because then I could say, look, don't come mugging me or I'll be able to shoot you. So again, it's really hard to work out what causes violence in society. So yeah, again, I'd be really interested to figure out or to find out what kinds of things you wrote for that clip. It's really thought-provoking, at least. And yeah, I don't see those issues in the US being solved anytime soon, because again, it's so divided. So you've got some people on the one hand saying it's really important that we retain the right to have guns, and then other people are saying no, they're really dangerous and bad and cause too many problems. And there isn't really a way to sort of bring those two sides together. I think it's really tricky. Yeah, I can't solve that problem. Sorry, folks. Anyway, just to share my screen with you again, because we're going to bring it back to the UK now. And again, I hope the notes that you managed to make about those questions were of good quality. Feel free to email me with your work. We do kind of expect now that we can see some evidence of your work. So send me something at some point to show that you've done the work and done the activities of this lesson, which brings me to the final activity of the lesson, which is in the files area of this lesson, you will find some information about, well, let me see. The file is called Lesson 3 Trident Resource. And there's a document there and it tells you all about this thing that we've got. I don't know if many of you know about it or know what it is, but it's called Trident. And it is the UK's nuclear deterrent, I suppose we'd call it. And I'm not a massive expert, but I gather that it is a small fleet of submarines. I think there are about 4 of them, and they're underwater somewhere around the UK, and no one's allowed to know where they are at any given point, because it's got to be a secret. Otherwise, we could just go and get them and cause all sorts of mayhem. And it's got the UK's nuclear weapons there, so that if we ever became under attack by another nation, we could then defend. Well, I don't know if call it defend yourself, because if some nation is attacking you with nuclear weapons and you fire nuclear weapons back at them, it's not really a case of defending yourself, but it's a case of putting them off attacking you in the first place, because of this idea of mutually assured destruction. Anyway, to cut a long story short, in recent years, there's been debate within the UK about whether or not we should spend money to renew this nuclear deterrent. So some people say don't renew it because the world's changed and we don't live in a sort of world anymore where it necessarily benefits you to have loads of nuclear weapons. I think we learned in lesson 1 about war, the war unit, that only I think about 8 countries have got nuclear weapons, and maybe a couple more are unconfirmed, but they're working on it. And so there's not really much evidence that it sort of benefits a country to have them that much, although I don't know, maybe it does. And then the other side of the opinion says, but it really does stop you being invaded if you're a nuclear power, because people aren't going to go picking fights with you, and generally it keeps the peace that you've got this kind of nuclear power on standby. I suppose it's been on standby since I guess the 50s and all the way through the 60s. In the 80s, there, when I was growing up, there was a big sort of worry about nuclear weapons, because it was the height of well, not the height of, but it was kind of the ends really of the Cold War. And people were worried about there being a nuclear war. Anyway, I'll stop rambling now, because your final task is to write a letter to the Prime Minister. Imagine that you're a pacifist and you're writing a letter to the Prime Minister, persuading them to either, again, it depends what your opinion is on this. You can either say, you want to withdraw funding to renew the Trident weapons program because you think weapons of mass destruction should be abolished because they lead to suffering and mass destruction and stuff like that. Or if you think B, that it should be renewed because you believe that a nuclear deterrent keeps the peace, then you can write to persuade the Prime Minister to do that. I need to get up to date with this because I'm not sure whether or not it's been finally decided. But I remember a couple of years ago, they were deciding whether or not to do this. And I think the last article I can remember reading was in October 2020. And I think they were still deciding then. I don't think it's been decided yet, but I might be wrong. But anyway, try and include in your letter what pacifism is, and chuck in some religious teachings about violence and war and conflict. And also, because in the activity, at least you're a pacifist, even if you're not really, just pretend, and just try and think of some reasons why pacifism is the only way of gaining peace, and why, everyone needs to be against war. But if you're not a pacifist, maybe you can change it if you want. If you, for example, believe in B is the way forward to renew the nuclear deterrent because you think that the threat of war, or even war in general, is a way to achieve peace, then you can argue along those lines as well. Again, it's just whatever your opinion is, just go with it, but try to think of reasons why you think what you think. And try and justify it. So remember that you're writing to persuade. I think you do that in English quite a bit, so you should be used to doing that. And I think that is the final activity of the lesson. So good luck with that. I will just tell you about this. I was going to just skip this, but anyway, there's a final thing. It's a chess set, and you have to try and think, what is the significance of the chess set with reference to pacifism? So just look at the image for a minute and try and work out what's happening. It's I always think it's obvious because I know the answer, but students generally think, no, what's going on? I don't really know. It's the person who made this, I think, is against war and conflict, if that's a clue. Right, I'll tell you the answer. So you've had a bit of time to think about that. The significance of this, whoever made this, I think it's a GIF where a picture just changes, but the significance of this is that at first sight, it looks like a normal chess set, but all the pieces are the same. As they move into the middle, you see that they're actually the same. It's not like white pieces on the left and black pieces on the right as a regular chess set would be. So it's as the pieces move into the middle, you see that the conflict would be impossible because you'd see that they're actually the same. It's only the board and the environment that they're in that makes them look different. And I think whoever did this was trying to say that, I think my suspicion is that whoever made it is arguing from a pacifist point of view. And what they're probably trying to say is that if you're in a war against other people, you might think they've got different uniforms. They're wearing blue uniforms and we've got grey uniforms or whatever. And so we're against them. But as they move in, as the pieces here move into the middle and meet each other and start to fight, it becomes clear that they are in fact the same. So I guess it's kind of a metaphor, maybe, for someone who's in a conflict and they've come face to face with an enemy and they think, this person's my enemy, I've got to kill them now. But they sort of realize that they're just both people with families and stuff like that, and they've probably got quite a lot in common maybe, but they're just circumstances have led them to be in conflict against each other. So that leads them both to an understanding that they're just both human beings and maybe shouldn't be killing each other and things like that. So it's a bit of a cheesy end to the lesson there. But anyway, I hope you learned loads about ideas about pacifism and conflict and violence in today's lesson. And yeah, I'd be interested to see your work when you manage to email it to me. And well done for all the work that you've done and all the thinking that you've done about these issues. And I'll see you next lesson. Well done. I'll speak to you soon.